She walked into the courtroom wearing a simple cotton dress, trembling under the weight of 1,000 stares. The judge's gavel slammed down, declaring her guilty of a crime she never committed. Whispers filled the room, mocking her silence, branding her as weak. But then, with hands no longer shaking, she reached into her bag and made a single phone call. The words she spoke froze the entire courtroom. "Hello, love. They are framing me. Could you come?" Moments later, the doors burst open. A man stepped in, his presence like a storm sweeping the room. The gallery fell silent. The corrupt judge's face turned white, because this was no ordinary man. This was the Supreme Court Justice, her husband, and in that instant, power shifted. Every secret, every lie, every betrayal was about to unravel. What happened next would shake the very walls of justice itself. Stay tuned, because this story will leave you speechless. Asterisk, the courtroom was silent. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of polished wood and stale paper. A flickering ceiling. Fan spun lazily above, its rhythmic hum blending with the occasional cough from the gallery. All eyes were on her. She stood trembling, clutching her small handbag tightly against her chest. Her simple cotton dress clung to her frame, damp with nervous sweat. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, drowning out the judge's voice as he read the charges. She tried to speak. Her voice cracked, soft and unsure, like a child's whisper in a storm. "I did not do this," she said. Her words fell flat, swallowed by the hollow room. The judge leaned forward, his face expressionless, his gavel poised in his hand. His eyes were sharp, cold, and unblinking. He spoke with authority, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have been found guilty," he said. The woman's breath caught in her throat. Her knees buckled slightly, but she forced herself to remain standing. The gallery murmured, whispers slithering through the silence like snakes. She felt their judgment, their disbelief, their cruel curiosity. The judge smirked. A subtle curl of his lips, almost hidden behind the solemnity of his robe. She looked at him, her eyes wide with fear, but there was something else, something steady. She reached into her bag with trembling hands. Every eye followed her movement. Gasps rippled through the room as she pulled out a sleek black phone. She dialed a number, her fingers steady now, her breath even. She pressed the phone to her ear and waited. The judge raised an eyebrow, irritation flickering in his eyes. "Put that away," he barked. She ignored him. Her voice, soft but firm, filled the tense air. "Hello, love," she said. The room went still. She continued, her words clear and calm. "They are framing me. I am in the district courtroom. Could you come?" There was a pause on the other end. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Thank you, Justice," she whispered. The color drained from the judge's face. The murmurs in the gallery turned into stunned silence. The woman lowered the phone slowly, her eyes never leaving his. The gavel trembled slightly in his grip. Sweat gathered at his temple. The fan above seemed louder now, slicing through the heavy tension like a blade. The judge cleared his throat, but his voice faltered. "Justice," he muttered. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. She stood taller, no longer trembling. "Yes," she said softly, "my husband." The words struck the room like a thunderclap. The whispers exploded, a storm of shock and disbelief. The judge leaned back in his chair, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms. The courtroom doors creaked open. Uniformed officers straightened, their posture tense. A figure stepped inside. The weight of his presence filled the room before he even spoke. His black suit was immaculate, his silver tie glinting under the harsh lights. His sharp eyes swept across the courtroom. Cold and calculating, every person in the gallery lowered their gaze. The judge's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. The woman's husband, the Supreme Court Justice, stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with silent fury. The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his robe suddenly feeling too heavy. The woman's heartbeat slowed, steady now. She watched her husband approach the bench. The justice's voice was low, controlled, but it carried like a whip crack through the silence. "Explain this." The judge's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. The justice stepped closer, his towering presence casting a shadow over the bench. The woman's fingers loosened around her bag. She finally allowed herself to breathe. The gallery sat frozen, as if the air itself had turned solid. The judge's hands began to tremble. The gavel slipped from his grip and clattered against the desk, the sharp sound making several people flinch. The justice's gaze was like steel. Unrelenting, he turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the faces of the jury, the officers, and finally the trembling man in the robe. His voice was a low growl now, each word deliberate. "You will release her immediately." The room was silent. No one dared to move. The judge swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. He nodded, his voice cracking. "Yes, Your Honor." The justice's stare did not soften. The woman lifted her chin slightly, her shoulders squaring for the first time that day. The tension in the courtroom thickened. Pressing down on everyone like a weight, the justice reached out his hand. She walked toward him, her steps slow, measured, now the sound of her heels echoing through the suffocating silence. The judge wiped the sweat from his forehead with a trembling hand. Every eye followed her as she took her husband's arm. He placed his hand over hers, firm, protective, and turned his gaze back to the trembling man in the robe. The air in the room felt colder now. The justice leaned forward slightly, his words barely above a whisper, but they were sharp enough to cut through the tension like glass. "You will regret this." The judge's face turned pale, his lips trembling as he tried to respond. His voice came out weak, barely audible. "Yes, Your Honor." The justice's stare was unblinking. Like a predator watching its prey, he turned slightly, his sharp gaze sweeping over the officers lined against the walls. "Escort my wife out," he ordered, his tone calm but carrying an edge that made every man in uniform straighten. 2 officers stepped forward immediately, their boots clicking against the marble floor. The woman walked between them, her hands still resting in her husband's. Her steps were steady now, her fear replaced with quiet strength. The murmurs in the gallery rose like a wave, hushed voices whispering about the man who now controlled the room. The judge sank into his chair, his body stiff, his breath uneven. He tried to compose himself, but his hands betrayed him, shaking visibly as he fumbled with the papers on his desk. The justice did not move. He stood tall, his piercing eyes fixed on the trembling man before him. "You framed an innocent woman," he said slowly, each word precise, heavy, cold. The judge opened his mouth, searching for an excuse, but none came. The justice took a step closer, his polished shoes echoing like a warning bell. "You abused your power," he continued. The judge's throat tightened, his collar suddenly feeling like a noose. The gallery was silent again, the tension so thick it seemed to choke the air itself. The justice leaned forward, resting both hands on the bench, his face mere inches from the judge's. "Do you know who I am?" The judge's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes, Your Honor, Justice of the Supreme Court." The justice's lips curled into the faintest, most dangerous smile. "Then you know," he said, his voice low, "that I do not forgive corruption." The judge flinched. The justice straightened, his commanding presence filling the chamber. He signaled to one of the officers. "Take his gavel," he ordered. The officer hesitated, glancing at the judge. The justice's gaze snapped to him like lightning. Now, the officer swallowed hard, stepped forward, took the gavel from the trembling judge's hands, the sound of the wooden handle leaving. His grip was deafening in the heavy silence. The justice's expression remained calm, but his eyes burned with controlled fury. "This court is under review," he declared, "effective immediately." Gasps rippled through the gallery, people whispering and shifting in their seats. The judge's hands gripped the edge of the bench, his knuckles white, his mind scrambling for words, but none came. The justice turned to face the room, his voice carrying like a thunderclap. "Every decision passed by this man will be reopened." The officers shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between the justice and the disgraced judge. The woman, standing near the door now, watched silently, her face calm but her eyes glistening. Her husband's power was a shield, one that no corruption could pierce. The judge slumped back in his seat, his face drenched in sweat, his reputation unraveling with every passing second. The justice turned back to him slowly, his voice soft now, almost like a whisper meant only for the trembling man. "You tried to destroy her life." The judge's breathing quickened. The justice stepped closer, his shadow falling over him like a curtain. "And now you will watch yours crumble." The justice's words hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. The judge's lips trembled, his fingers clutching at the polished wood of the bench as though it could save him. His eyes darted to the gallery, searching for support, but every face avoided his. He was alone. The officers closed in, their boots heavy on the marble floor, sound echoing like a drumbeat of judgment. The justice straightened his tie, his calm composure terrifying in its precision. "Remove him," he commanded. 2 officers stepped forward. The judge recoiled, pressing himself back against his seat. You cannot do this," he stammered, his voice breaking. The justice tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "I already have." The words were soft, but they carried the weight of finality. The judge's body stiffened as the officers gripped his arms. He struggled, but his resistance was weak, pathetic against their firm hold. Gasps rippled through the gallery as they dragged him from his seat. His robe slipped from his shoulders, pooling on the floor like a fallen crown. The justice turned his gaze toward the jury, his eyes sharp and cold. "You were complicit," he said. The jurors shrank back, fear flashing in their eyes. "Every one of you," he continued, his voice even but merciless, "will answer for this." He raised a hand and gestured toward the exit. "Clear the room." Officers moved swiftly, ushering the stunned spectators out of the chamber. The heavy doors slammed shut, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. The woman stood by the door, her fingers clutching the strap of her bag. Her eyes met her husband's. He offered her a slight nod, a silent reassurance. She took a deep breath, body finally relaxing after hours of fear. The justice approached her, his expression softening as he reached for her hand. "Come," he said quietly. She placed her trembling hand in his, and he squeezed it gently, but behind him, officers forced the disgraced judge to his knees. The sound of his sobs echoed through the empty chamber. The justice turned his head slightly, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Let him stay there," he ordered. "Let him feel what it is to be powerless." The woman glanced back at the scene, her heart pounding with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Her husband guided her out of the courtroom, his steady presence like a fortress around her. In the hallway, the polished floors gleamed under the harsh lights. Every officer they passed straightened, saluting the justice as he walked. The woman clung to his arm, her steps slow but steady. The whispers began again, hushed voices of staff and officers murmuring about the fall of a man who thought himself untouchable. The justice led her toward the grand exit, the towering doors framed with brass and marble. He paused for a moment, glancing back. Through the narrow opening of the courtroom doors, the judge was still on his knees, his face buried in his hands. The justice's eyes hardened. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. His voice was so low that only his wife heard him. She tightened her grip on his arm, her fear finally giving way to a deep, unshakable sense of safety. Outside, the city lights glimmered against the night sky. Cameras flashed in the distance, reporters rushing forward, their voices rising in a chaotic chorus. The justice raised his free hand, and the crowd instantly fell silent. He guided his wife down the steps, his expression a mask of control and power. Behind them, the courthouse loomed like a fortress. But tonight, its walls felt like a prison for those who had dared to betray justice. The justice paused at the bottom of the courthouse steps, his sharp gaze sweeping across the crowd of reporters and flashing cameras. The sea of microphones surged forward, but no one dared to shout a question, the weight of his authority pressed down on them like a storm cloud. His wife clung to his arm, her face pale but composed. Her chin lifted in quiet defiance. A line of black vehicles waited at the curb, their polished surfaces gleaming under the streetlights. Officers formed a protective barrier, their movements sharp and disciplined. The justice opened the car door for her, his expression softening for only a moment as he helped her inside. The door closed with a heavy thud, shutting out the chaos. He straightened his jacket, turned and faced the swarm of cameras. "Justice," one reporter dared to whisper, her voice trembling, "is it true your wife was framed?" The justice's eyes narrowed. He did not answer immediately. The silence was crushing. A silence that made every camera flash feel like lightning. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, low, and dangerous. "She was framed by those entrusted to uphold the law," he said. Gasps rippled through the crowd, the weight of his words sinking in like a stone dropped into deep water. He continued, his voice rising slightly, each word slicing through the night air. "This is not only about my wife. This is about a system that allowed corruption to fester in its very heart." Reporters exchanged glances, their pens scratching frantically against notepads. "This is only the beginning," he declared, his expression cold and unyielding. The officers closed ranks, guiding him toward the waiting car as he approached. A man in a gray suit stepped from the shadows of the courthouse entrance. He was tall, thin, with hollow eyes that darted nervously. The justice stopped in his tracks, his hand instinctively brushing against the car door. The man adjusted his tie, his voice low but steady. "You should not dig deeper," he said. The officers moved forward, but the justice raised a hand, halting them. He studied the man carefully, his gaze piercing. "And why not?" he asked. The man's lips curved into a feint, an unsettling smile. "Because the judge was not acting alone," he whispered. The justice's expression did not change, but his eyes darkened. The man glanced toward the courthouse, then leaned closer. "Every courtroom, every bench, every gavel you trust," he said, his voice trembling slightly, "has been touched by the same hands." The justice's jaw tightened. The man stepped back slowly, melting into the darkness of the courthouse steps before anyone could stop him. The justice opened the car door, slid in beside his wife, his mind sharp, calculating the convoy of vehicles. Pulled away from the courthouse, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. Inside the car, the woman reached for his hand. He turned to her, his expression softening only for her. "You are safe now," he said quietly, but his eyes, cold and focused, stared out the tinted window at the glowing city streets. The storm was only beginning. Asterisk. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows as the convoy moved through the streets. Inside the car, the justice sat rigid, his hand resting over his wife's trembling fingers. She stared straight ahead, her mind replaying the moment the gavel struck, the cold voice declaring her guilty, even though she was safe now. The sting of humiliation clung to her like a shadow. Her husband's jaw was set, his profile sharp against the dim glow of the passing streetlights. She turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why me?" He glanced at her, his expression softening, though his eyes burned with controlled fury. "Because they thought you were weak," he said. She lowered her gaze, tears threatening to spill. "I was," she whispered. "No," he said firmly. His voice carried the weight of certainty, a calm strength that cut through her doubt. "You stood there with dignity. You called me even as they tried to crush you. That is not weakness." She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around his. "But this," she said softly, "it is bigger than us, is it not?" His silence was answer enough. The car turned, sharply leaving the bright city streets behind. They drove into a quieter district, the towering buildings giving way to dark alleys and shuttered shops. The justice's gaze remained fixed outside, scanning every shadow. "They thought they could use you to get to me," he said, his tone low and measured. She looked at him, fear flickering in her eyes. "Will they try again?" He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. They already have, he replied. The words hung in the air like a warning bell. The convoy slowed as they approached. A heavily guarded gate. Armed men stepped forward, their weapons gleaming under the dim security lights. The gate swung open silently, revealing a secluded estate beyond. The car pulled into a driveway lined with tall hedges and security cameras. As they stepped out, the cool night air wrapped around them, carrying the faint scent of wet earth. Officers escorted them up the stone steps of the house, their movements swift and disciplined. Inside, the lights were dim, the air filled with a quiet tension. A man in a dark suit was waiting in the foyer, his hands clasped behind his back. "Sir," said, bowing his head slightly, "it has already begun." The justice's eyes narrowed. "How many?" he asked. "Too many," the man replied. The woman's heart pounded as she watched their exchange. Her husband led her to a chair, his voice gentle as he spoke to her. "Rest for now," he said softly. But even as he spoke, his mind was elsewhere, calculating. Preparing, she could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the sharpness of his gaze. He was already planning his next move as she sat down, heard the faint hum of computers from the next room, the sound of papers being shuffled, voices murmuring. Orders. This was not just a home. It was a command center. She looked around, her unease growing. "How deep does this go?" she asked quietly. The justice stood at the window, staring out into the dark night. His reflection in the glass looked like a shadow, figure carved from stone. "Deeper than they realize," he said. His voice was calm, but there was a storm. In his tone, a promise that justice would not stop at a single courtroom. Asterisk. The justice stood at the window, his silhouette framed by the glow of distant city lights. His wife sat quietly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her body finally beginning to relax in the safety of their home. The chaos of the courtroom felt like a distant echo now, placed by the low hum of security radios and the soft ticking of a clock. He turned to face her, his sharp features softening. As his gaze met hers, "It is over for him," he said gently. She let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her like a tide, but she could still see it in his eyes. This was only one battle in a much larger war. "You are safe now," he repeated. Kneeling in front of her and taking her hands in his, "No one will touch you again." Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from the unshakable calm in his voice. For the first time since the trial began, she felt truly secure. He placed a kiss on her hands and stood, his commanding presence filling the room once more. From down the hall came the sound of muffled voices, his team already working to uncover the depths of the conspiracy. He walked to the doorway, his posture straight and unyielding. "Rest," he said softly, glancing back at her. "I will handle the rest." She nodded, finally allowing herself to lean back in the chair, her body sinking into the cushions as exhaustion overtook her. The justice stepped into the hallway, his expression hardening like steel. The door closed softly behind him, sealing her in peace and him in purpose. Outside, the night was silent, but the air crackled with tension, as if the world itself knew what was coming. And for those who had dared to twist the law and betray the innocent, this was not the end. It was only the beginning of their reckoning.